Do you want to master your English listening skills and streamline your ability to hear and understand what people say through the use of podcasts? If yes, you're in the right place. Today, I'm going to give you my complete blueprint on how to accomplish this. If you don't know me, my name is Daniel. I'm an English teacher, and I have been helping thousands of people like you master their English in order for them to move abroad and settle in an English-speaking country. I added timestamps throughout to help you navigate your way around. There's a lot here to go through. We've got why use podcasts, how to use podcasts, when to use podcasts, how long should I listen to the podcasts every day, the difference between active and passive podcast listening, things to watch out for, tips for progressing, and then a summary at the end. Let's get straight into it. The first aspect, why use podcasts? With anything in life, we need to make sure that we are being consistent. If we're not being consistent, we're not going to make any good type of progress. Podcasts are the easiest way to stay consistent every single day. If we compare podcasts to music, for instance, music is okay, but music uses language that we don't usually use in everyday situations. If we compare podcasts to movies, they are a little bit difficult to get consistent with because you can only watch it, in a sitting, in your lounge room, at the TV, by your computer. You can't continually watch movies all day long. These really limit movies and music to being good. They're helpful, but for a solid, consistent way to keep your mind in an English environment, podcasts are definitely the way to go. Podcasts are enjoyable. We can look at anything that sparks our interest. They're very flexible. We can adjust many aspects of them, the type of accent or the speed at which we're listening to them. They're very accessible. We don't need a big screen TV. We just need our phone, which is usually in our pocket. And they're very discreet. We don't need to be in a private setting to use them. We can listen to it almost anywhere. If you want a more detailed description of why I recommend podcasts to my students, there is a video I've made on that. You can check the card or it's in the description below. Now onto the good stuff. How do we use podcasts? Some people will come for lessons and they'll listen to podcasts, but they're not doing it right. They're making a lot of mistakes. If we can cover these three things, I'm going to go through three things. If we can cover those while we're doing the podcast, we're going to see a lot of really good progress in your English. Now, the first thing that we need to remember, the podcast must be something we enjoy. Why does it need to be something that we enjoy? Well, according to the studies, if we are enjoying ourselves, we have increased dopamine, we have increased brain plasticity, and it increases our ability to retain information. Not only does it help us to learn something in a shorter period of time, it also helps us keep going. We're able to do that thing for a much longer period. Let me give you an example. When I was a kid, I grew up on a farm. I had a lot of chores to do. I didn't really enjoy doing chores. I don't think any kid really does. But if my dad had said, hey, I'll race you and the winner gets an ice cream, I would probably have a great time doing those chores, looking forward to that ice cream, having a blast. When something is enjoyable, it's much easier to accomplish. You're not really thinking about how long it's taking, why you have to do it. Your brain is focused on the positive aspects. This is really helpful for listening to the podcast, carrying on, being consistent, and making a lot of great progress. The second thing for our podcast learning, we need to understand. Now, this is really, really important. Understand between 70 and 80% of what we're listening to. When we're learning a new language, the fastest way to remember and retain that language is to comprehend and understand what's going on. We can be in an environment where people are speaking that target language and not understand anything. We will still get something from that, but it won't be anywhere near as efficient. Let's say we're given 50 pieces of new information all at once. it's going to be really difficult for us to try and understand and remember all of that information at the same time. Whereas if we're given 10 pieces of new information, we're going to be fairly comfortable remembering those 10 pieces. Not only is it going to help us remember, but when we've got 50 pieces, it is difficult to stay positive. You get overwhelmed very quickly. If we have 10 pieces of information, it's much easier to carry on. It is more enjoyable. Now, if we relate that to listening to the podcast, if we are understanding, let's have a look. If this is the amount of understanding that we have, right? If we are understanding only, let's say 30%, then that podcast is a little bit difficult for us. This is like trying to have 50 new pieces of information. You can't really get a lot of efficient learning from that. But on the other end of the spectrum, if you are listening to something and you're over here and you're getting like 100% of the information and you understand everything, then that's too easy. There is no challenge. Like what can you learn if you're understanding everything? You might be practicing, but you're not pushing your brain enough to actually get some progress. That's why it's better to aim somewhere in there between 70 and 80%. Between 70 and 80, yeah. This way, when you are listening to your podcast, there is this much new information. We have that 20, 30% new information, which is an amount that we can handle. And it's inside the context of that 70 to 80%. This allows our brain to take that information, put it inside the context, and understand it, to comprehend it. For maximum learning, we always need to be a little bit uncomfortable. I like to call this zone the perpetual mild discomfort zone, or PMD zone for short. If you're having trouble finding the correct podcast to use, here are a few suggestions. If it is too difficult for you, so if you're in that understanding 30% range, even up to 50%, 60%, if you're anywhere below 70, you can try a couple of things. You can either just change the podcast. Now you can change it to whatever you want, but there is absolutely no shame in listening to a children's podcast. They're fantastic. It's at a much easier level. They're going to keep the vocabulary at, maybe A1, A2 type level, and you can really build a lot of confidence by doing that. If you're on the other end of the spectrum and you're finding that the podcast is too easy, then of course you can go change the podcast, find an expert in a field that you're not familiar with. Maybe Dr. Huberman, he has a fantastic podcast all about the brain. I love that one. Find something difficult. Really challenge yourself. Also, you can adjust the difficulty of the podcast by changing the speed. If your podcast is too difficult, but you really enjoy that podcast, you want to keep listening to it, just adjust the speed, put it down a little bit, 0.7, 0.5, whatever you need, in order to increase your comprehension of that to that PMD zone between 70 and 80%. Likewise, if you're listening to a great podcast, it's a bit too easy for you, but you really want to keep doing it, you can push yourself by increasing the speed. Go to 1.5 speed and see if you can still understand what they're saying. Now, on to the third thing we need to keep in mind when doing podcasts, and that is consistency. I am going to say consistency all the time. I don't stop talking about consistency. Consistency, it really is king. The only way to really become fluent in a language is to be consistent. If we're not practicing every single day, it's going to take us a really long time to become fluent. I know life gets really busy. I know things can be tough. We've got work, we've got kids, there's so many responsibilities, but we must find time. We forget about 50% of new information within 1 hour and 70% within 24 hours. Our brains are quite literally designed to forget things. Without consistent reminders, that information is good as gone. I know it's very difficult to stay consistent, but that is the whole reason I am making this video. It's to help you stay consistent using podcasts to improve your fluency. The next section, this is where we get to the good stuff. This is when. While I can't work with all of you one-on-one, I want to give you this system so that you can stay consistent in your practice every day. So here is the blueprint. We need to create a schedule. This is so important. If we're going to rely on our own willpower to get things done, we are going to fail. We are only human. I don't know of anyone that has managed to practice their English every single day without some form of organization. We need to get organized. What I want you to do, you can do it now if you want to. You can pause the video and start it. You can do it later, but I would say don't go to sleep until you've done this. I want you to create a schedule on a Word document, an Excel spreadsheet. You can look at the one that I've used here. Very simple. It doesn't have to be complicated. And I want you to split up every day into either 30 or 60-minute intervals. This is not only really useful to look at when we can squeeze in some English, but you can use it for your everyday life and see where you're allocating your time. Once you've put in all the normal daily activities that you're doing throughout the week, we're going to add in some podcast time. But before we do that, I want to explain the difference between active podcast listening and passive podcast listening. They are a little bit different, and I'll want you to add in different forms of podcast listening at different times throughout the day. The first one was active listening. When we are actively listening, this is when we are able to use our body. I'm not talking about active and passive mentally, I'm talking about physically. If we are active in listening to our podcasts, this is when we can take notes. We can get a pen, we can type on our phone, and we can jot things down. We can also pause and rewind things if we hear something that we're not quite sure of. Active listening also allows you to watch people. You can see their physical cues. You can get a bit more of the context from what they're actually doing with their body. Although I'm not going to talk at length about creating a vocabulary list in this video, I will in another video later on. But please, as you're listening, anything you don't understand, put it on your vocabulary list. Second one is obviously passive. Now, passive, as I mentioned before, passive is not talking about sitting there and expecting your body to magically make you fluent in English. That's not what I'm talking about. We still need to be very active in our mind, but passive is when we are unable to take notes, when we can't watch the video, when we can't make that vocab list. Maybe when you're driving a car, when you're cooking a meal, when you're doing something and your hands are busy. And while you're listening to the podcast, still try and be like an active part of the conversation, if you can. Your brain needs to register that what you're listening to is important. Our bodies learn things when it is linked with survival. So if you can, obviously your podcast is not part of your survival, but if you can take it in a serious matter, then your body sits up and pays attention. If you're very nonchalant about it, it won't really stick. You really must try to engage your mind as you're listening. Now that we've gone through the active and the passive forms of listening to the podcast, I want you to go in and add any space that you can, beginning with active listening. Active is obviously the hardest one to schedule in because you need a chunk of time with nothing else going on. You can't stack up things and do multiple things at the same time. This is a time devoted only to active podcast listening. Once you have put some active listening in there, you can then add in the passive listening. You will most probably have more time for passive listening than active because you can stack things together. And even though active is better, passive is probably more important because you're able to be consistent with it. When we do something every single day, it's almost like our brain says, whoa, this is so important. I'm hearing this every day. I need to remember it. and your mind kind of prioritizes remembering all the information you're learning. Here are some examples of times during the week when you could use passive podcast learning. Could be driving the car, riding the bus or the train or the taxi, walking your dog, doing daily chores, hiking a mountain. While you're in the shower, put the Bluetooth speaker there, listen to it like that. When you're in the gym, on your lunch break at work, while cooking a meal. There are endless times that you could do it. And once you've got your podcast times strewn throughout the week, if you're not sure on how much to put in every week or every day, that leads me into the next section, which is how long per day. This is a little bit controversial. I know that everyone is different. I know we all have a different way of living, different culture. I know, I get it. I've got students from around the world. We all have different ways of living. But what I do see in all of my students is a clear distinction. There are two groups. There are the people that practice every single day and the people who don't. There really isn't much in the middle. The people who practice every day, they have such a good amount of progress. And the people who don't, even if it's every second or third day, they just can't get to the same level. So in my opinion, with the flexibility of a podcast, being able to listen to it at all times of the day, I would aim for a minimum of 60 minutes every day. I know that sounds like a lot of time, but if you think about it and you plan it properly, you'll find it's not that much. Most of my students are able to accomplish this goal quite easily just by using their commute to and from work every day. If you live 30 minutes away from work, that's easy. You've already completed your entire podcast goal for the day. If you can do more than 60 minutes a day, that's fantastic. Let me put this into context. If learning a language, let's say it takes you 1,000 hours, right? If we do an hour a day, then 1,000 hours will take us, like a little bit less than 3 years, 2.7 or 2.8 years. That's from an hour a day. That's a fairly short amount of time. If we are doing our English for 10 minutes a day, then it's going to take, like 6 times longer. So like 18 years. It's such a huge difference. Consistent daily practice, at least 60 minutes, you'll see a difference very quickly. Now, before going into the final section of this video, I want to just do a quick recap of what I've covered. There's a lot there. The 3 things we must not forget to make podcasts really efficient. It must be something we enjoy. We need to understand between 70 and 80%. We must be consistent. You need to create a schedule of your life and add in at least 60 minutes of either passive or active or both podcast listening during your day. With that being said, here are some things to watch out for. The most common way that people stop improving, they have a lack of consistency. That is the number one way to improve and is also the number one killer of your progress. If you want to improve, be consistent. The second way, not enough time spent in English. As I mentioned before, the difference between 60 minutes a day and 10 minutes a day is 3 years and 18 years. It's a huge difference and you'll notice it. The third way is a wrong attitude towards English. If we view learning English as a chore, if we say, I have to study, if it's a negative response, then we are going to learn much slower. If we see English as something that is enjoyable, we see it as a privilege, we see it as a ticket to the life that I've always wanted, you'll learn much quicker and it will be easy to stay consistent. The fourth way, people choose the wrong podcast. They'll follow their interest a bit too much and choose something that is maybe a bit too difficult for them. Perhaps they'll be listening to something that is too easy because they don't really want to push themselves anymore. I highly recommend looking for the right podcast at the right difficulty level, adjusting your speed, changing what you need to, making those tweaks to get into that PMD zone. Then you'll have a lot of efficient progress. I've been giving this blueprint to my students. And what I've found through teaching thousands of lessons is there are some aspects that will really help keep you going and keep you improving. So I've got 4 tips as well on how to utilize this to its maximum benefit. I want you to attach listening to a podcast with a pre-existing habit. What do I mean by that? Okay, so if we have podcasts here, right? When you get up in the morning, let's say you want to listen to the podcast first thing in the morning, then we need to attach listening to a podcast to something you already do. If you have a coffee every morning, let's say you put the kettle on, right? The click of the kettle, that should be your reminder, oh, podcast. Let's say you have an espresso machine. When you press that button to start the machine, that click, that should be your reminder, oh, podcast. Let's say you want to listen, this is the most common way, while you're driving to work in your car, right? Then as you get your keys and you put that key into the ignition and switch your car on, as your car starts up, oh, okay, that's your reminder, podcast. Stick it in, press play. So whatever you're doing, whenever you've scheduled your podcast in the day, try and attach the closest habit to the podcast. That way you don't miss it. The second thing, a lot of students will come and say, I feel like I'm plateauing. I'm struggling to really get into it. I've hit a level and I can't seem to get to the next place. If this happens to you, try and vary the topic. We tend to stay in something that is comfortable. And so if you're always looking at IT podcasts, change it to something like dancing, something completely different that seems interesting to you, but is got completely new set of vocabulary. That will really challenge you. The third thing is to create a vocabulary list. I know I said I would create a new video on that later. I will, but I don't want you to miss this opportunity. Start writing. Whenever you find something you don't understand, create that list. And the final tip, change the accent of the podcast to your target country. If you're wanting to move to Canada, listen to a Canadian podcast. You'll learn their local phrases and idioms. You'll start to pick up how they speak to each other. You'll pick up their culture, which will be very different to if you listen to a podcast from Australia or from England or from South Africa. Wherever you want to go, wherever you want to live or visit, listen to that podcast. You'll be surprised at how much you can learn really quickly about the culture by just listening to them talk to each other. This will be invaluable for you and help you avoid any unnecessary misunderstandings. If you follow this video, if you do it thoroughly, I can guarantee that you will make much more progress than you have been making if you haven't been spending this much time using podcasts. I'll put the summary of the video and all the main points up on the screen now. If you want to take a screenshot of that, please feel free. Now, my final word on this is just to say go for it. It's to cheer you on. It's to encourage you. Learning English can feel really overwhelming at times. I completely understand, but you can definitely do it. You can definitely become fluent, and you can definitely accomplish your dreams of moving to another country. I know there's been a lot of information in this video. It's getting really late over here. I'm losing my voice. I may have missed something. If you have a question, put it in the comments. I'd love to get back to you and help you through this. But for now, I'll see you in the next video.